Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. We are right at the start time. My name is Jacob Hayden, and I am a program coordinator for SaferSim UTC, and welcome to our webinar series. SaferSim is a Tier 1 university transportation center with the research priority of promoting safety, and our webinar series features research projects from within the center. So thank you for joining us today. There will be time at the end of the presentation for questions and discussion. So attendees, you can use your microphone or the chat box to participate, and feel free to use the chat box at any time throughout the presentation as well. If you have a comment or question, we will hold those comments or questions till the end though. And with that, I would like to welcome our presenters from the University of Iowa, Elizabeth O'Neill and Michelle Reyes.
Thank you, Jacob. So we are really excited to talk to you all today about our project that was an extended evaluation of training programs to accelerate hazard anticipation skills in novice teen drivers. So just a bit of a background. I know many of us here in attendance are pretty familiar with teen driving, but we do know that the highest teen driver crash rates occur immediately upon beginning unsupervised driving. We know also that 45% of those crashes are attributed to a failure to identify potential hazards on the roadway. And as this nice graph from Voss et al. Shows, that this crash rate does decrease quite a bit over the first 18 months of driving and continues to decelerate after that period. So in response to this, the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety sponsored the development of 2 training programs for novice drivers. This resulted in the Perceptual Adaptive Learning Module, or the PALM, and the Accelerated Curriculum to Create Effective Learning, or the ACCEL. Following their creation, the AAA Foundation sought an independent evaluation of these programs, which is what we'll be covering today. So the PALM is delivered via the web and trains users on 6 categories of hazard anticipation. So path conflict, stopping vehicles, roadside incursions, forced path changes, obscured potential hazards, and emergency vehicle effects. The program uses an adaptive learning algorithm that considers the accuracy and speed of users' responses to prioritize categories of learning that are tailored to the needs of the individual user. While the training uses specific scenarios for training, the overall goal of the program is to generalize and accelerate the process of perceptual expertise for young novice drivers. Users watch scenarios unfold on the roadway in a video and then indicate what they believe first triggered the hazard from the multiple choice list, which you can see here. The ACCEL was developed to train novice drivers on 3 main skills: hazard anticipation, hazard mitigation, and attention maintenance. Each main skill is presented in both strategic and tactical contexts. Strategic training focuses on skills that should be used prior to the potential hazard materializing, whereas tactical training is centered on the skills that need to be used when the hazard may be imminent. These skills are presented in 3 different types of driving situations, which are associated with increased crash risk for young drivers. That's intersections, rear ends, and curves. The ACCEL is delivered via an interactive PowerPoint presentation and aims for users to acquire the identified skills using an active method by which they're expected to make mistakes and are mentored to the correct response in order to achieve mastery. I'll hand it over to Michelle.
Thank you. So next I'll talk a little bit about our approach for developing our driving scenarios. So we wanted to create a set of simulator drives that were representative from both programs. So we conducted an inventory of the PALM and the ACCEL and identified where there was direct and indirect overlap of content. So our scenarios included 5 events that came directly from both programs, 4 events where the content was directly taught in one of the training programs and was similar to content in the other program. 5 events that came directly from the Palm training and 1 event that came directly from the ACCEL training only. So altogether, we had 15 events that came from the training programs. Our scenarios also included situations like following a lead vehicle, a school zone, and 4-way stop signs, for an example. We also had some other ones. And from this, we created 3 simulator drives that all had the same content, the same events. Next, click, Elizabeth. And, but they did vary by the order, by the cause of the event, what kind of set up the event, and then the environment or the scenery around the event. We do want to note that these were presented as potential hazards. That is, they did not materialize to an actual threat that required a response. And today in the presentation, we're only going to be able to present results from a few of these events. Next slide, please. So our study employed a pre-test, post-test design with 3 conditions: a control group that received no training, and then the 2 intervention arms, the Palm and the ACCEL. In those conditions, the participants completed the training immediately after doing a baseline drive in the simulator during visit 1. This design is highly controlled and not only provides a control group for comparison of the natural accumulation of driving experience across all 3 of the visits in the protocol, but the baseline drive also allows us to track changes over time within a condition and even within a participant. So visit 1 occurred within 2 weeks of licensure for independent driving, and then participants returned for a second visit after 6 weeks of independent driving experience. And then the extended evaluation, which occurred in a 3rd visit and was funded by the SaferSim UTC, occurred 4 months after visit 2. Next slide. So we use the NADS 2 simulator, which is a high fidelity fixed base driving simulator that has a 135-degree forward field of view. We used a full body cab that was a Chevy Malibu with real vehicle input controls. And behind the simulator, we had a rear channel on a large display, and the participant could see that through the actual rear view mirror. Because our primary interest was in how the participants were attending to the potential hazards and not so much their driving performance, the motion base was not needed. And also NADS 2 could be dedicated to our study for the 18 plus months that were required to complete development and data collection. Next slide, please. So our participants wore decabless eye tracking glasses, and there was a camera for each of their eyes and a forward view camera. And we had a network connection between the simulator and the D-Lab software that ran the eye tracker. And this allowed us to log event information in the eye data so we could synchronize the data streams later. And you'll see on the right that the scenario included these black and white markers that were recognized by the D-Lab software. These stayed in a fixed position relative to the participant's eye point. So they just kind of floated above the hood in a constant position like you see there. The reason that these were included is because we intended to use them in the D-Lab software for defining areas of interest and conducting glance analysis with the software. However, we found that the targets we were trying to track were too dynamic for us to employ that methodology. So we had to go to manual coding as a plan B. And for the manual coding, which as I'm sure almost all of you know, that's very labor and resource intensive. So we were able to do that for 6 events. And our coders were trained on the coding protocols, and reliabilities were calculated to ensure acceptable inter-rater reliability for each of the events. Next slide, please. So our participants were 15 and 16-year-olds newly licensed to begin independent driving in Iowa. In addition to the traditional intermediate license for 16-year-olds, Iowa also has a minor school license. This allows teens to drive to school and school-related events. And so we did enroll participants with that type of license. They completed their first visit within 2 weeks of beginning independent driving. A lot of them came in the weekend right before they were going to get their license. We also asked that they anticipated driving at least twice a week after getting their license. So we enrolled 141 participants, and we had 108 complete visit 2. I do want to note that most of that attrition was due to issues with our eye tracker, the loss of some eye data. We only had a handful of people experience simulator sickness and not be able to complete the study. Altogether, we had 90 participants complete the 3rd visit, and you can see the breakdowns by condition in the bottom row. So some of the dependent measures for the eye movement data that we looked at were the distance to the hazard at the first glance the participant made to it, the total number of glances made during the event window, the total looking time, and then the proportion of the event window spent looking at the hazard. And some of the driving performance dependent measures were minimum speed, speed variability, distance to the hazard if they made a response. And this depended on the event, but responses we considered included accelerator release, a brake press, a change in lateral position. This list is not all of the measures that we calculated, and we do want to point out that not all of the dependent measures are appropriate for all of the different types of events that we included in the study. So initially we looked at the eye and driving dependent measures separately, but as we all know, there's not just one appropriate response after recognizing a potential hazard. So that led us to consider ways of combining eye and driving performance measures. And so next slide. We did this by adapting an approach previously taken by Katarami and her colleagues. And what they did was their approach maps eye glances and driving performance onto Ensley's 3 levels of situation awareness. So level 1, which is Ensley calls perception, was operationally defined as making a glance to the potential hazard. The level 2 of comprehension was operationally defined as making another glance to the hazard or having a total glance duration of greater than a second. Now, if the participant continued to look at the hazard once they were in close proximity to it, or if they made a mitigating driving behavior after first looking at it, then we coded that as level 3 projection.
So the analytical approach that we used to examine these data was a mixed effects regression approach. It includes fixed effects of condition, visit, and most importantly, their interaction, which will be what we focus on in our reporting of the results today. It also included a random effect of subject, and we also included a number of covariates in our models, including license type. As Michelle mentioned, Iowa has that unique licensing for minor school license. We wanted to make sure that we accounted for that in our models. We also included the total miles that were driven by teens, which they reported to us weekly throughout the duration of the study. Either using odometer readings or by tallying their miles each week, depending on what worked best for them. As Michelle mentioned, we did have 3 variations of the hazards in different simulator drives. So 3 simulator drives in total. And because the events varied in their presentation, perhaps the environment that was surrounding them, we wanted to make sure that we were controlling for that in our models as well, even though they were counterbalanced throughout the study. And then, of course, we wanted to include gender as a covariate in our models, as we know that that has a very big impact on risk-taking and injury prevention. So the first event that I'm going to talk about today is our Midblock Crosswalk event. Now, this event was represented in both the PALM and the ACCEL training programs. As you can see here, the driver begins in the left lane of travel with 2 road signs that indicate that a pedestrian crossing is up ahead. 2 pedestrians are just visible in the distance, but those will be occluded by this large truck or another large vehicle in the other drives as the drivers do get closer to the hazard. Now, following occlusion, the pedestrians are again visible right by the crosswalk as a major part of the event. So the first result that I will share with you is the distance at which participants were to the event when they first made a glance to pedestrians after they were no longer occluded. So at that close proximity window. We did see a condition by visit interaction here when comparing ACCEL to control and visit 3 to visit 1. So when examined by condition, visit did predict an increase in the distance at which participants first glanced to the pedestrian at visit 3 compared to visit 1. And that was specific to participants in the ACCEL condition. Conversely, visit did not predict a reduction in the distance at which participants in the control condition first glanced to the pedestrian. In fact, you see sort of an opposite pattern there. Now, the maximum level of situational awareness achieved was nearly uniform across all conditions, across all visits, reaching ceiling effects at visit 1. So there were no main effects or interactions that were reached for this particular analysis. The next event that we'll look at is our parallel parked car event. This was another event that was represented in both training programs. For this event, the participant is in the right lane of travel and approaching a parked car that's at a bit of an angle and that's off in the distance. As the driver gets closer, the blinker of the car ahead can be seen, indicating that they do intend to join the roadway and could potentially enter the driver's lane of travel. So here we examined the percentage of time that participants spent glancing at the event over the entire event window. So here we did find a main effect of visit, with visit predicting participants spent 8% more time looking at the event at the third visit as compared to the first visit. And while it did not reach statistical significance, there does seem to be a trend for those in the training conditions to spend slightly more time looking at the event at visit 2 than they did at visit 1, whereas controls don't show that similar type of increase until visit 3 after they've had quite a bit of driving experience. As for the situational awareness level, we found a condition by visit interactions for both training conditions when compared to controls. When we examined those by condition, visit marginally predicted an increase in situational awareness for participants in both of the training programs. Visit did not significantly predict situational awareness for controls, indicating that participants in the training conditions showed a significant improvement following training, whereas those who did not receive training did not. And finally, our obscured cross-traffic lane event. So this was, oh, not finally, sorry. We have 2 more events. This event, the obscured cross-traffic lane, was represented in the ACCEL program, but was also similar to some of the content that could be found in the PALM training conditions. So as you can see, drivers were in the right lane of travel approaching a 4-way intersection. There is a large bus here, which is blocking your view of potential cross traffic, or the participants' view of cross traffic. So what we'll show you guys now is the analysis of the situational awareness level that was achieved. So we don't see any effects of situational awareness, either by condition or visit. And as you can see, everyone was quite variable in the level that they achieved here. Notably, for this event, on average, participants really didn't reach that first level of situational awareness, meaning that most participants didn't really recognize the event as a hazard following training or following experience in the roadway environment. And finally, our partial lane obstruction event. This was unique to the PALM training program. As you can see, the participant is in a lane of travel, and there is a vehicle that is partially blocking the lane. And we had several different vehicles. This is just one example. We had a taxi. I think we had a mail truck as well. So we wanted to know at what distance to the end of the event did participants shift in the lane to give themselves clearance of that partially obstructed lane. So despite being a POM unique event, we found a significant condition by visit interaction for those in the ACCEL condition at visit 3 compared to control. The distance to the vehicle when participants shifted in the lane occurred for those and the ACCEL condition at visit 3 compared to visit 1. Participants in the ACCEL condition shifted in the lane at a greater distance from the hazard at visit 3 than they did at visit 1, but visit did not predict a lane shift for those in the control condition. And while not statistically significant, those in the POM condition did look to shift in the lane at a further distance to the event at visit 2 compared to visit 1. So there is a trend in that particular direction. In conclusion, overall, our analyses didn't indicate, they did indicate a limited net benefit of the 2 training programs. I would say that the impact of the training programs was most evident for events where objects may move into the lane ahead of drivers, as evidenced by a trend toward increasing glance time toward the parallel parked car and increased distance at which participants in the ACCEL training condition looked at the pedestrian at the Midblock Crosswalk. There were also a number of limitations to the current study. As you may have noted, there was high variability in performance across all visits, but also particularly at visit 1. This may be because we had true novices in our study. Many other studies in this domain do use teens and young drivers, but a lot of those participants have several months to even years of driving under their belt at the time of their participation. It could be the case that our drivers didn't have quite enough independent driving experience. And also to that effect, we don't know what their instruction was prior to enrollment in the study. So in order to get licensed in Iowa, either a minor school license or an intermediate license, we do know that all of our participants completed driver's education programs, although that has changed in our state recently. But we don't know what sort of practice they had before coming into the lab. We also were not able to use that automatic glance analysis as we had anticipated and hoped for, which kind of threw us for a loop, but we were able to recover thanks to a lot of help from some undergrads. And also, we analyzed these events in isolation. Other studies in this domain have collapsed across events for analysis. We were trying to examine many different diverse events that were represented in the 2 training programs. So we felt like analyzing these events independently was the right approach to get us started. Moving forward, we are applying situational awareness coding to an additional 2 events that were coded for iData. And we also recognize that, as you saw in visit 3, that our teams reached ceiling for situational awareness right away. So we may need to refine our coding criteria to better reflect the events that were represented, as well as the duration of the event window for the current study. We also plan to combine similar events for analysis as well. So just our references here, I'm happy to go back to those if anybody would like to capture those, but I would like to first take a moment to acknowledge, of course, our funders, the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety. A special shout out to Brian Teft for all of his feedback as we went along. Bill Horry fits into that category as well. So thank you for that. And then, of course, the Safer Sim UTC for allowing us to do this extended evaluation of our study. We had a number of partners that we worked with. So Neil Lerner, who was formerly with Westat, stayed on after retirement as a consultant, Phil Kelman at Insight, all of our University of Iowa team, and a special shout out to all the RAs who spent a lot of time and effort cleaning and coding that iData, and then of course the teens and their parents. So that concludes the presentation. We'd be happy to take any questions that you may have at this time.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Michelle. As Elizabeth mentioned, we do have some time for questions and comments. I think we're all familiar with Zoom now, so if you're comfortable, feel free to unmute yourself if you'd wish.
Elizabeth and Michelle, this is Jody. I don't know if you can see me. But one question I have for you guys is, do you think you would have seen different things if the hazards had actually manifested for the subjects? I know we made a decision early on to make these into more potential hazards so that you didn't have kids, crashing their car, early in the drive. But do you think that there's any effect of having hazards actually manifest versus not?
Absolutely. I think that we would have seen, we certainly would have seen differences in the mitigative behavior. So lane shifts, changes, braking behavior, accelerator releases. Because one thing that has been challenging in this is trying to decipher what an accelerator release means in this context, when it occurs, and the situational awareness coding is helping us sort of tease some of these things apart. As these behaviors are linked, right? You see something, you react to it. But yeah, I've wondered the same thing, and I do think that we maybe would have seen some bigger differences had we allowed the hazards to manifest. But as you pointed out, if we were to do that, and if a teen crashed in the scenario, how would that then impact all of the subsequent hazards that they encounter? And it could have been particularly problematic if we saw it all at visit 1 and then none at the other visits. So it was, one or the other.
And I'll also add that by not having the hazards completely materialize here, we were able to, I think, better assess, the mitigation piece of it. So I think we would have observed cases where maybe we didn't have like a good clear look at the hazard, but the person reacted just kind of out of a gut reaction. They saw something move, and so they changed lanes or they swerved left or what have you. So I think by keeping the potential hazards as kind of benign, that I think we're better able to assess kind of that understanding, which I think we can all understand is really challenging to figure out whether somebody really saw what you hope they saw, right?
Yeah, really hard to measure this stuff. Yeah.
I was going to ask a question about the measures. First of all, really good work, really important work, and really hard work. That's really, really excellent work. But the measures seem very tricky. I had expected when you began the talk, what we'd see is a general improvement just from driving experience, and then a better improvement given that they had the training. And partly one indication of how difficult it is to measure is that there doesn't look to be an improvement for those who don't have the treatment. And it just seems like a really hard thing to measure. I just wondered if you had ideas about other ways to measure where you might even see just the general improvement that comes from experience.
Do you mean a specific measure that we could have used, or
other ways to try to capture what it is that they gain from experience?
Yeah, we do struggle with the data that we've analyzed to this point to show that. I think we do have some analyses that speak to that, but not all. There's so much variability in the data that's made that difficult. But I think you make a good point. We should be looking for those sorts of measures. I would open this up to other people who study driving in the group as well. If they have suggestions for good ways for us to do that, we would certainly be open to it, as we are continuing to look at these data and find better ways to analyze this, reduce that variability. Looking at something as simple as just sort of speed maintenance throughout the drive might be one good indicator. Something really simple, but that could be effective in trying to capture that.
I do.
So related to that question, I was just curious if you guys had used your miles driven variable to give some idea of the experience that your drivers had. As so somebody who came to your first visit may have only, may only drive 20 miles a week, whereas somebody else who came to the first visit drives 100 miles a week. And so their cumulative miles, they're getting more experience as time goes on. And I just wondered if maybe that might make a difference.
It does. It certainly does. So we did include it in those models as a covariate.
Okay.
But the way that the modeling works, you do get to see if it is significant in any way. We didn't look at the miles driven per visit, but we do see that could be a significant predictor across those visits. So yes, it does make a difference. I don't know if I could tell you right off the top of my head how and what measures. It wasn't always a significant predictor in the model, but it did crop up occasionally. But again, we just included it as a covariate at this time. But I think that's another avenue we can explore. Yeah.
And I do see Shannon Roberts has her hand raised. Shannon, we'll go to you.
Yes, thank you, both Elizabeth and Michelle, for such a really good presentation. The question I have is, based on past research that we've seen with both ACCEL and PALM and how teens and students who get exposed to these training programs, they receive such a huge benefit. And with your measurement here of situation awareness, we see like almost the opposite. Sometimes they're getting worse with time. And so I know we've talked a bit about measures, and the focus here was on situation awareness measurement, but can you all just postulate, why we're seeing sort of this opposite trend in that both ACCEL and PALM are not manifesting the benefits that we've seen with past research?
Well, I think that's tricky. And Michelle, you may want to weigh in on this as well, but I know that past studies of the ACCEL and sort of predecessors of the ACCEL have actually shown, some have shown benefit, but some haven't. I think that there's a lot of back and forth in the literature about these programs. But I think for our situational awareness coding, in previous uses, in previous studies that have used that situational awareness coding, they've also had a talk aloud protocol. So they know what these teens are thinking as they do it. Which is something that we don't have in the current study. So we're having to sort of make some interpretations there. And I think because of that, we do need to work to refine how, I'm not sure that just applying the situational awareness coding as it's been applied in the past is the appropriate approach. So I think that we do need to sort of look at our events, make some very specific decisions about what how to achieve those various levels based on the event itself, because they're all so different. I'm not sure that quite answers your question, but I think that's something that we're struggling with as well, in trying to figure out the best approach to try and tease out these differences, because anecdotally, having done both of the programs, I can see where they would be really beneficial to these teens. And also, we got some feedback from teens on the training programs, things they felt they enjoyed, things that they felt like they learned things. So, I think that's an important consideration as well. Michelle, I don't know if you have anything to add there or not.
Well, I was thinking about, we did include that baseline drive, and I think a lot of the other studies in this domain they have a control group, but they don't necessarily measure that control group or the training groups at baseline. And so, we I guess it's not really surprising the amount of variability that we encountered at the beginning, but I think that's really just having all that variability in there. It's hindered our ability to kind of detect patterns. And another open question is, we mentioned these were real novices. They had very little, if any, individual or unsupervised driving experience when they started the study. And maybe that's not the best time to deploy this type of training. They're probably freaked out driving by themselves for the first time, and maybe it's better that they get that before, at some point before they start driving independently, sometime in the training phase, or maybe after they've gotten a little bit of experience. And it was a condition that we did consider when writing the proposal, but there's just there's only so many things you can look at in one study. But that's another thought, is maybe maybe that's not the best time to deploy this type of training.
Yeah.
But I don't know which way to go with it.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. This has been a great discussion and great presentation, Elizabeth and Michelle. I think we can end it there. We're already a little over time. I will say our next webinar will be Tuesday, June 1st, and that is featuring a project from the University of Central Florida and looking at smartphone warnings to pedestrians. So you'll see registration info about that coming soon. And with that, we will end the meeting. Thanks again, and see you at the next one.